My name is Gavin. I'm a student at the University of Texas, and I am with a college-run entertainment news show called Sneak Peek.
Hi, my name is Theodore Shapiro, and I'm the composer for Severance.
So, just want to kind of dive in, getting into the weeds.
Okay.
This season of Severance has been a bit more experimental compared to the first season. There are several episodes that sort of break the conventions that we were established in season one, including What Was Hollow, Chikai Bardo, Sweet Vitriol, Cold Harbor, and several others. Did you have any specific approach to tackling these non-conventional episodes and their scores? Or was there anything that you found challenging with season two that you didn't encounter back in season one?
Well, so yeah, I mean, I would say that I was focused from the beginning on finding languages for specifically for Woe's Hollow, uh, and also for episode 8, the Salt's Neck episode, just finding unique variations on the overall sound of the show that reflected those locations. And so from the beginning, like when I was sketching new ideas before they started shooting season 2, a lot of the work that I was doing was focused on episode 4 in particular. I just generated a lot of material inspired by the idea of them being out in the forest. And I also had some ideas that I wrote for Cobell in Exile and Salt's Neck. Um, Episode 7 is also has a unique palette, but that one I didn't really start finding until I started seeing footage from the show, and it didn't really lock in until I started actually having something to work with. Ultimately, the thing that was the hardest to crack was actually episode 4. Even though I'd written all of that music, there was something that Ben was looking for tonally in that episode, that we just like, it took us a while to find it. And ultimately, the thing that cracked it, because they were working on the picture, was working on the music, like it wasn't quite right. And then he was like, "Oh, I really like that one cue that you did in season 1, episode 3." And I was like, "Oh, that unlocks the whole thing." And it ended up that a lot of the music in the beginning part of that episode I wrote without a click. So, a lot of times when you're writing music, there's like a defined tempo, and you're writing to the click. Um, but when you're writing just freely and playing freely, you play differently and you just do different things. So a lot of that music in the beginning of the episode really built around these piano improvisations that are very free, very kind of floaty, and not, within a grid. And that's kind of what gives that part of the episode this like sort of floating and ethereal feeling that Ben was looking for.
I'm really glad that you brought up that kind of relationship with Ben and working on these compositions before seeing the footage, because that kind of leads into one of my questions, which is there was previously an interview in which Ben has expressed that he considers having your compositions before shooting an essential part of the process, which is a little bit kind of unusual from your traditional, scoring kind of workflow. And so I was curious if you could maybe speak to what that creative process is like for you and how have you kind of navigated that somewhat untraditional process of composing for the show?
One of the rules that I proposed, and it was accepted when I started working on the show, was that I was going to write a ton of music before they started shooting, and and the deal was that there would be no temp music at all. And if you don't know what temp music is, that is when you're working on a movie or a TV show, and they take music from other movies or TV shows and they cut it in as a placeholder until the composer has written their music. And the problem with temp music is that everybody gets used to it, and So it really locks you in. It locks you into writing a certain way, and because music really gets its fingerprints on picture, and everybody kind of gets used to the way that it works. So that's how I work on the show. Before each season, I write this big library of music so that Ben and the editor, when they start having picture to work with, can be cutting in music that is unique to Severance. And it also means that Ben on the set plays back the music while he's shooting. And you know, the traditional role of the composer is that the composer comes on at the end of the process. You shoot the film, you edit the film, the composer comes on and writes the music. And you know, what is um you get to respond to all of these choices that the actors have made and and that the director has made, and those choices are inspirational and moving um and an incredible guide to the work that you do. It's really amazing to be able to create something that enters into the production phase of a project, and that the director can be inspired by, and maybe the actors can be inspired by. So to get to do that and to have sort of the music be part of the creative, chain in that way is really it's really cool, and it's worth doing all of the extra work to have the music kind of be ingrained in the DNA of the show in that way.
Yeah, that sounds like a really fascinating kind of approach to the production of that.
Yeah, I love it.
And so I want to talk a little bit about Cold Harbor, but specifically the big musical sequence in Cold Harbor, the choreography and merriment scene. So much fun. It's just an incredible kind of diversion from the usual sound of the series. And I was curious if you could maybe speak to some of the influences or challenges that you may have encountered whenever you were kind of coming up with that.
Yeah. Well, so Ben at some point told me about this idea, and the idea didn't come up until I believe it was during the strikes.
Mm.
And so there was a pause in production, and they came up with this idea. And so Ben immediately started like sending me all these marching band things that he really likes. He really likes the movie Drumline with Nick Cannon, so played me some stuff from that. And in the script, Dan wrote that the first piece is The Cure,
Mm.
him sort of written as a marching band piece, and that the second one was going to be something called The Ballad of Ambrose and Gunnell. But we don't really know too much about who Ambrose and Gunnell are yet. But it gave me an opportunity to write this music that has that kind of that really cool kind of funky vibe from Drumline, and then superimposed on top of it are these melodies that are really part of the Egan mythology. So the Cure hymn, the Ballad of Woe's Hollow, which is the tune that Miss Huang plays on the theremin in episode 4, and now the Ballad of Ambrose and Gunnell is like a third hymn that belongs to the Egan mythology in some way. So we're gradually kind of building up this body of an Egan musical liturgy, and it was really fun to do it in the context of the marching band.
Yeah. I'm glad that you brought up Drumline because I think this kind of brings up a really interesting dynamic of you and Ben's relationship, which is that you've primarily worked on a lot of comedy and
Yeah.
his previous comedy projects like Tropic Thunder, Zoolander 2, etc. But never quite as something as dark and mysterious as Severance. And so I'm curious if maybe you can maybe speak to the challenge of the differences between writing for comedy and drama, and also maybe, what has having that comedic background between you and Ben brought to this new working relationship on a show like Severance?
Yeah, so comedy is often really different from working on drama in that the timing of it is so specific. And the tone of it is often like a very, very narrow target. Like you want the tone of the music to be, you know, to feel real so that the characters feel grounded. And yet you also want to give the audience permission to laugh. So sometimes the tone in a comedy can be really, really specific and a challenge to like really nail. And the timing, as I said, like you're so often just like setting up some kind of a rhythm so that, so that the joke happens in exactly the right place and you leave space for the joke. And so it's very, very specific. Drama is often, you know, much less like that. You often want to play, flow over the picture. You definitely don't want the music to feel manipulative or like like it's overly emotive and or overly manipulative, Mickey Mousey for sure. And so in a way, comedy is a great thing to do before you do drama because when if you move from comedy to drama, it's sort of it feels in many ways much less challenging. A lot of the specific needs of comedy sort of fall away, and you can really kind of focus more on finding a tone that can flow over the picture and sort of play the canvas of the show rather than sort of be really focused on moment to moment.
Thank you so much for sitting down with us. This was a lot of fun. Congratulations on the now third Emmy nomination for the series. Hopefully, a second win. And as always, Severance season one and season two are both streaming on Apple TV Plus. Thanks, sneak peekers.
Thank you, Gavin.